Al was a regular farmer who accidentally maxed out his stats while growing his massive eggplant. However, when he saves a busty princess from a demon attack, he gets hired as her personal bodyguard, but he ends up clapping her instead. One morning, while Al was heading to the capital to sell off his produce, he spotted some adventurers fighting a losing battle against a dragon, so he decided to help. He only wanted to divert the dragon's attention to allow them to escape, but when he threw a carrot at it, it blew up, shocking the adventurers. Realizing that he'd become one of those overpowered protagonists he'd heard so much about, Al got back on his wagon and drove away, leaving the adventurers to wonder who their mystery helper was. When Al arrived at the capital later, he saved a young woman from a hooded man riding on a horse who had abducted her. Annoyed, the man attempted to cut him with a small knife, but thanks to his Ultra Instincts ability, Al easily dodged his attacks and disarmed him. While the guards dragged the man away, the damsel he'd saved from distress approached him to thank him for saving her. Al told her it was nothing and left before she could ask what his name was. Later on, as Al was leaving the city, the girl he'd saved earlier approached him to thank him again and formally introduce herself as Fal, the first princess of the Kingdom of Magus. Additionally, she offered him a position at the palace, but he refused it. Hoping to get him to change his mind, Fal offered to give him some land near the capital, so Al asked why she was desperately trying to get him to agree to her offer. Fal explained that it was because the man he'd disarmed had an average status of 500. Confused, Al asked what she meant, so Fal explained how a normal person's stats differed from those of an adventurer, knight, and hero. Just as she asked to see his stats, the adventurers he'd saved suddenly showed up, taking the attention away from him. They told the guards that their quest had been completed, but not by them. While they were explaining what had occurred during their fight with the dragon, Fal deduced that Al was the one who saved them. However, just as she turned to ask him about it, she saw him driving away in his wagon. Just then, a messenger informed Fal that she was needed at the palace, and on getting there, the knights revealed that a swarm of monsters were approaching the city. This was shocking as the demons and humans already signed a peace pact, and as the king wondered what was going on, Cecil, the head administrator, revealed that he had already linked all the suspicious activities that happened that day to Romeo Vanded, one of the Demon King's commanders who wanted revenge on humans. He then suggested that the king and the princess escape before the swarm arrived, and after a combined effort begging the scrawny old man to save himself and his sheltered daughter, they finally agreed to flee from the city. Meanwhile, Al just arrived home, and while he was trying to relax, Testa, his childhood friend, came knocking on his door to tell him about the swarm of monsters approaching. Hearing this, Al rushed to his farm to check on his crops, and was relieved when he saw that the monsters hadn't laid waste to it. Just then, he noticed the monsters, so he hid behind a tree and observed that they were ignoring everything around them as they made their way to the capital. Initially, Al planned to ignore them. However, when he thought about the impact of the capital's destruction on his products, he decided it was hero time. At the same time, in the forest somewhere, the king and the princess were being led to safety by Cecil and a group of knights. When they got to a dead end, Fal suggested they turn back, but Cecil said there wasn't any need to. He claimed they were at the right place, and the next moment, he attacked the king. The knights attempted to avenge their king, but Cecil took them out easily. He then began one of those boring villain speeches, and after that, he transformed, revealing that he was the demon Romeo. Additionally, he revealed that, unlike his former master, the Demon King, who sought to destroy their kingdom, he wanted to rule over it by impersonating the king. When he tried to hit Fal and the king with a spell, the king blocked it by casting various magic circles. Unfortunately, because of his injury, he was too weak to maintain the circles, so Fal fortified it by casting the same spell and fortified it. Using their combined powers, they tried to stop Romeo's spell, but the demon was too powerful for them. Just as he was about to airdrop them into the afterlife, Al suddenly showed up with a hoe and countered his spell. Shocked, Romeo attempted to attack Al, but Al caught his blade with his bare hands. He then flung Romeo against the mountain, which pissed him off, so he decided to enter final boss mode. He absorbed the powers of the monsters closest to him and reverted to his true form. However, before he could attack, Al showed him that he was the new and improved Saitama. As soon as the monsters saw that Romeo had been taken down, they fled for their lives. The next day, the royal family thanked Al and rewarded him with a 33,000 square meter farmland in exchange for joining the Adventurers Guild. The following day, he went to the guild with Fal, who was disguised as a commoner. Before they went in, Fal told him to keep her identity a secret and asked him to address her as Philia while they were at the guild. This made Al ask if she thought she was Clark Kent, so she explained that because of her enchanted hairpin, others would see her as someone else. Bearing this in mind, Al stepped into the building, and he was immediately greeted by the guild master, who took him to the front desk to begin his registration. Just as Al was introducing himself to Helen, one of the receptionists, his stomach let out a loud growl. Following this, Helen fed him some pie, and after he was done, she asked him some questions. While he was answering them, the adventurers he saved from the dragon walked in, and when they saw Al, they mentioned that he was the one who took down the dragon. As soon as the other adventurers in the room heard this, they began murmuring among themselves, but Al tried to deny it. The adventurers commended his strength and introduced themselves to him before telling him to count on them as his seniors if he ever needed help. After they left, Helen informed Al that since he was a new adventurer, he would start as a G rank. She then handed a form with a list of materials he had to gather to complete his first quest. The list also contained details of the monsters he might encounter in the area and how to avoid or eliminate them. Before letting him embark on the quest, Helen gifted Al a robe which was imbued with magic powers and could amplify the wearer's defensive power. After thanking her for the robe, he left the guild with Fal, who went on her way once he told her he was going on a quest. Later that day, while gathering the items on his list, Al came across a scale he had never seen before. As he tried to figure out what monster it came from, he was pounced upon by a female orc in heat. Fortunately, before his V-card could be swiped, Jake arrived and slayed the orc, saving poor Al from the unspeakable horror that would have befallen him. Luke and Lamia arrived shortly after, and they teased Al for his ability to pull fugly monsters instead of baddies. When they stopped, Al showed the trio the scale he'd found, and they speculated which monster it belonged to. Eventually, they decided to head back to town, but before they could take a step, they were hit by a sinister aura. The aura was so menacing that they remained frozen in place, unable to move as the monster it belonged to walked past them. Al managed to move his head to check the monster's stats, and what he saw sent another chill down his spine. The following morning, while Helen was speaking to an elderly lady, Al walked in and told Helen he had something he wanted to report immediately, so she took him to the guild master. At the guild master's office, Al and the other adventurers gave an account of their encounter with the monster. From what Al saw, its attack power was 230,000, and if it were to attack the city, it would lay waste to it. When Luke mentioned that the monster was called the malevolent dragon Ouroboros, the guild master and Helen were beyond shocked. Jake then suggested that they seal off the forest for the time being and presented the scale that he'd found. As soon as Helen saw it, memories of her and her younger brother running through the forest flashed in her mind. As soon as the memory reached where her brother became a snack for Ouroboros, Helen passed out, shocking everyone. While conversing with one, the elderly lady, Al learned that Helen had no memories of her childhood. It so happened that she and her husband had found Helen passed out by the bank of a river and adopted her. One said Helen might have encountered Ouroboros in the past, and hearing about him had triggered something in her. After hearing this, Al vowed to investigate by visiting the library to see if he could find any relevant information from the time Helen was found. Moved by his determination, one asked him to wait and returned a few moments later with some recovery potions. She told him to take them as payment for his investigation because she also wanted to know about Helen's past. As Al was leaving the guild, a mailman named Rizz came to give him a letter from his mother, making Al wonder how he'd found him. Later, at the library, Al asked the librarian for a damage report from the time Helen was found. The woman told him that only certain people had access to read damage reports, and just as he resorted to begging her, Fal showed up. She asked the woman to allow Al to read the damage report, and the woman happily consented. Al found the report he was looking for, and after reading it, he discovered that there was a village near where Helen was found that had been wiped out. According to the witness reports, the village had been reduced to rubble, and all they found were Ouroboros' scales. Fal explained that Ouroboros was known to ingest ruin and despair so it could live long, But after a battle with its natural enemy, the benevolent dragon Mirage, it was believed to have died. However, seeing as it had shown itself recently, Al and Fal agreed that the history books were wrong. Armed with this new information, Al decided to go to the village to investigate further, and Fal said she'd go with him. The following day, they arrived at the destroyed village, and as they looked around for clues, Al heard a voice calling out to him. He quickly rushed in the direction from which it was coming and found the owner. While he conversed with the boy, the confused Fal wondered if Al had lost his marbles and asked who he was speaking to. Surprisingly, it was at that moment that the dumb idiot realized he was speaking to a ghost. The boy introduced himself as Rai and said he'd been waiting for years for someone to hear his voice. He then asked Al where he'd gotten his robe, and Al told him it was a gift from Helen, which made the boy relieved. He revealed that the robe belonged to him while he was alive, and after hearing this, Al draped part of it over Fal's shoulders. At first, the delusional princess thought he was putting moves on her, but when Al drew her attention to Rai, she panicked. It turned out that since the robe belonged to Rai, it allowed its wearer to see and converse with him. Al asked Rai who he was, and Rai revealed that he was Helen's younger brother. Al was surprised and told Rai that Helen had no memories of her childhood, prompting Rai to say that her life was in danger. To help Al and Fal understand why Helen's life was in danger, Rai told them about what happened 15 years ago. It had been a normal day, and while he was playing, Helen came to call him for lunch. Her sudden appearance caused him to trip and fall, so she began fussing over him like a mother hen. While he was trying to get her to stop, Ouroboros's dark aura suddenly enveloped the area, and he began attacking the village. The siblings ran back to the village, hoping to find their parents, but all they found was Ouroboros and a few survivors. One of the kids bravely defended his family, but Ouroboros found his bravery annoying. He said hope was like poison to him, so he had to eradicate it. And as he began doing this, Rai told Helen they had to run. Helen didn't want to, seeing as she believed that their parents were still alive, but Rai told her to stop being delusional. As they ran, Ouroboros came after them, and when poor Helen couldn't run anymore, she fell. Ouroboros then landed behind her and tried to eat her, but Rai stopped him by throwing his dagger at his eye. Rai felt proud that he'd wounded the dragon, but Ouroboros healed himself and focused his attention on Rai. Helen pleaded with Rai to run, but the boy stood his ground and got hurt. Devastated, Helen rushed to her brother, and as she held him in her arms, Ouroboros started gloating. He was enjoying the look of despair on Helen's face and said it was his favorite look. He then told Helen that he would spare her life. However, he promised to return 15 years later to finish her and her new friends off. With his dying breath, Rai weakly told Ouroboros that he wouldn't allow him to hurt his sister, so the dragon said he'd keep Rai's soul in the world so that he would bear witness to Helen's death in the future. After saying this, Ouroboros vanished like Satama's hairline, leaving Helen to mourn Rai. Back in the present, Rai revealed that Ouroboros was nothing but a murderous, psychopathic lizard. The evil dragon spent his time annihilating villages and cities, but always left a sole survivor so that they could spread the tale and cause terror among the people. Rai said that after he died, Ouroboros's consciousness flowed into him and he learned that the dragon powered up, feasting on the negative energy of his prey. Now that he had awoken from his long slumber, he would come for Helen and those closest to her. Rai pleaded with Al to save Helen's life, but Al said that even Superman would be powerless against Ouroboros. Rai then said that if they could stop the flow of negative energy Ouroboros lived on, they could weaken him and gain a fighting chance. Al agreed to give it a shot, and before leaving with Fal, Rai gave him a message to give to Helen. When they arrived back at the capital, Fal left to supervise the evacuation of the people while Al went searching for Helen. Unknown to him, Helen had left home and wandered into the forest to meet Ouroboros because her memories had returned, and she thought she could take him on alone. Ouroboros commended her stupidity and then began mocking her, saying it was her fault Rai died. Additionally, he told her that everyone in the capital city would also die because of her, and Helen pleaded with him to spare their lives. The more she begged, the deeper she fell into despair, and Ouroboros enjoyed every second of it. Hoping to get him to agree, Helen offered her life in exchange for everyone else's, but Ouroboros's cruelty told her that it didn't matter because they would all die. After hearing this, Helen hesitated to drive the dagger into her throat, but Ouroboros was a master manipulator, and he convinced her to do it. Just as she was about to do it, Al arrived and stopped her, which angered Ouroboros greatly, so he slapped him out of the way. Fortunately, Al's robe prevented him from getting badly hurt, so he got back up and rushed to punch Ouroboros in the face. Surprisingly, the punch was powerful enough to push Ouroboros back, but it didn't knock him out. He commended Al for catching him off guard, and Al acknowledged that he was significantly weaker than Ouroboros. However, he promised Helen that he would protect her, making her recall the time when Rizz said the same thing to her. Al then challenged Ouroboros, who let out an angry growl before trying to attack Al. To his annoyance, Al dodged his attacks, making sure to move away before Ouroboros struck. Even when Ouroboros breathed fire on him, Al refused to give up and tried to face him again. Seeing this, Helen pleaded with Al to run for his life, and when she started sounding like those characters whose only existence was to move the plot along, Al grabbed her and ran. He told her to stop acting and thinking like that because he wouldn't let her die. Additionally, he gave her a speech about how what happened 15 years ago wasn't her fault. Still, the dumb girl argued that it was, so he told her to shut her pie hole up for a second and told her what Rizz asked him to tell her. Hearing her brother's encouraging words, Helen was momentarily transported to the past, where Rizz was smiling brightly at her. Finally, she accepted what Al had been telling her, and he told her that hope was the only way to defeat Ouroboros. The next moment, the dark skies were pierced by light, and Ouroboros angrily demanded to know why Al was attempting to foil his plans. In response, Al taunted him, saying that his powers had started weakening because Helen was no longer afraid of him. The next moment, Ouroboros was hit by the light, and he screamed as if in pain. Annoyed, he swooped down, hoping to attack Al, but the farm boy gave him an uppercut which knocked him out. Helen approached Al to ask how he was doing, but in an unexpected plot twist, she stabbed him. Confused, Al tried to drink the recovery potion that one had given him, but his hands wobbled and he poured it. Helen mocked him for this and then actively began trying to impersonate Jack the Ripper, but Al dodged all her slashes. When she stopped, he asked what had come over her, not noticing that her eyes had changed. When she saw that he was attempting to heal himself with magic, she charged at him again. But before she could reach him, Mirage appeared, blocking her path. Mirage told Al to focus and revealed to him that Ouroboros was the one controlling Helen's body. Ouroboros didn't appreciate the fact that Mirage snitched on him, and when he began complaining, Mirage told him to put a pin in it. He then returned his attention to Al, asking him to take his power of regeneration and use it against Ouroboros. After Al absorbed Mirage's power, his wound healed, but Mirage became weak and collapsed. He managed to instruct Al on what to do, stating that unless Ouroboros was purified, Helen couldn't be saved. Hearing this, Ouroboros began taunting Al, asking if he would hurt Helen to get rid of him. In response, Al punched Helen in the stomach, shocking Ouroboros, who hadn't expected him to be a full advocate for gender equality. He asked how Al could lay hands on a girl, and Al answered that Helen's eyes had begged him to do it. Believing Helen to have overcome Ouroboros' manipulation, Al offered her his hand, but as soon as she grabbed it, Ouroboros attempted to take over his body. However, to his surprise, he discovered that the only thing Al was thinking about was farming. There wasn't anything he could use to attack him and take over his mind, so he was pushed back. As Ouroboros attempted to make sense of his failure, Mirage woke up and finished him off. Before disappearing completely, Mirage thanked the now unconscious Al for helping him defeat Ouroboros once and for all. Later on, Al awoke in the guild's clinic to find Fal and Helen watching over him. Once Fal confirmed that he was fine, she happily hugged him but pulled away as soon as she realized she was being clingy. Al then asked what happened to Ouroboros, and Helen confirmed that Mirage had purified him before pulling an avatar. Fal was surprised to learn that Mirage had appeared because he'd only been a thing of legend. Al explained what led to his appearance, after which he asked Helen if there were no side effects of Ouroboros' possession. Helen revealed that although Ouroboros was gone, she had retained his powers, and when Al and Fal saw her arms change, they freaked out. Helen seemed to like the fact that she had this power and told them that she was going to use the power to help people. She thanked Al for relaying her brother's message to her and said moving forward, she would lead a happy life in honor of Rizz, who risked his life to save hers. Al smiled after hearing this, but Fal interrupted the sweet moment to ask why they were giving each other pipe me eyes. Of course, they both denied it, and that made Fal happy, as she didn't want to share Al. Helen then asked Fal who she was and what her relationship to Al was, since her hairpin was doing a perfect job of hiding her true identity. Fal and Al were caught off guard momentarily, but Fal recovered quickly and said she was a childhood friend of Al. Just then, the guild master, Jake, Luke, Lamia and one rushed into the room. They had been worried sick about Al and Helen, so they were glad that they were doing fine. As everyone talked over each other, one screamed at them to pipe down, saying Al needed all the rest he could get. Al assured them that he was doing fine and proved this by standing up. Seeing this, Jake declared that they would celebrate their victory over Ouroboros, stating that the guild master would pay for it.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it.
The old man told them he couldn't afford a lavish party, but the adventurers told him not to be a cheapskate because the palace would pay the guild a hefty sum for subduing Ouroboros. At the mention of this, Fal said they would surely get the money, confusing everyone, but when she realized her mistake, she quickly covered it up. Thankfully, no one thought too much about it, and they all headed to the common room to celebrate. While the celebration was ongoing, Fal approached Al and told him that she'd been worried sick about him the entire time he was battling Ouroboros. However, when she thought of how brave he was being despite being at a disadvantage, she became motivated to defend her people. Their attention was soon drawn to Helen, who was using her newly acquired powers as party tricks. Days later, Al was back on his farm, and as he and Testa walked towards the house after harvesting some crops, Reeks came bearing a letter from Al's father. In the letter, his father asked about his well-being and invited him to come spend some time with them. After hearing the contents of the letter, Testa asked when Al had last seen his parents, and Al admitted that he couldn't remember. This made Testa say he was the founding member of the worst anime kids association. Al assured him that he'd visit them once he had cleared all the quests he had taken on. Later that day, on his way to the guild, Al stopped by a tomato vendor's stall to purchase some tomatoes. As soon as he tasted it, he had a foodgasm and asked the vendor where he'd purchased his produce. The man said he'd procured them from Lurigus, and almost immediately, Al zoomed off. He went to the guild to ask Helen if she would allocate his quest to another adventurer, because he was traveling to Lurigus to see his parents and get some fertilizer. Helen surprised him by saying she'd take on the quests and explained that she'd been undertaking quests about 2 or 3 times a week. Because of this, she was now an F-rank adventurer, and she enjoyed using her powers to suppress monsters. Al was impressed by this development, and she assured him that he had nothing to worry about while he was away. On his way out of the guild, Al ran into Fal, and once she learned that he was going to see his parents, she insisted on going with him. But he yeeted out of there so fast that she didn't know which way he went. Sometime later, as Al made the trip to Lurigus, he encountered a male orc. Initially, he assumed the orc wanted to befriend him, but soon realized it was trying to clap his untouched cheeks.
Call an ambulance! But not for me!
He tried to get away but couldn't, and would have been violated if a blue-haired girl named Rory hadn't arrived and slain the monster. Al was beyond traumatized, but he thanked Rory for saving his rice cakes from getting clapped. Rory asked why he was tramping through the forest without an armed escort, and Al revealed that he was a rookie adventurer. However, for some reason, he seemed to be a magnet for down bad orcs. Rory teased him, saying he was just their type, before introducing herself to him. Once the introductions were done, she asked where he was headed, and he told her he was heading to Lurigus. Coincidentally, she was also heading there and offered to act as his escort all the way there, but Al had a few objections. He pointed out that they were of different genders and said it would be weird for them to travel together when they had just met. In response, Rory told him that if he dared to look at her the wrong way, she'd behead him, scaring poor Al. Seeing his reaction, she assured him that she was joking, adding that she wasn't good looking enough for a guy to try and put moves on her. Al asked if her eyes were decorative pieces because all he could see was her beauty. Flattered by his compliment, Rory blushed and thanked him, saying she knew he was just being polite. He tried to dispute this statement, but the girl hit him with a death stare, which scared him. As they continued on their way to Lurigus, they suddenly heard something approaching and took on defensive poses. Surprisingly, it was just Rizz, and he had come to deliver a letter from Al's mother. Al was surprised that the mailman had located him that deep in the forest, and Rizz said he was only doing his job. After Rizz left, Rory asked if the letter was important, and Al said it wasn't before showing her the pile of unopened letters his mother had sent. He said one of the reasons he was visiting home was to get her to stop sending letters to him like an obsessed fan. Although his primary objective was to procure the fertilizer to grow his tomatoes. Before he knew it, he started geeking out and lecturing Rory on tomatoes and how to grow them. The girl couldn't keep up with him, and when he realized he was about to overload her brain, he apologized. He then asked if she had any family members who were as clingy as his mom, and Rory revealed that her family didn't worry about her at all. Surprised, he tried to find out why, but she brushed his question aside and began pulling out a tent and other items from her bag. Al asked how she'd gotten all those items into the bag, and Rory revealed that the bag was like a pocket dimension. Just then, Al's stomach let out a deafening growl, so Rory prepared some food and gave it to him. When he was done appreciating and analyzing the food like a famed food critic, Al asked Rory why she was going to Rizz. Rory explained that she was currently in her training arc, but said she had taken on a side quest after learning from a merchant that demons were attacking people in Rizz. Intrigued, Al asked for more details on the attacks and their locations, but Rory said there weren't any. Captain Obvious stated that it was a dangerous quest she'd embarked on, and Rory said she didn't mind because, as the descendant of the hero, it was her duty to protect the people. This revelation surprised Al, but didn't change his opinion about the quest being too dangerous for her to handle alone. His concern surprised Rory, but it wasn't enough to change her mind, so she thanked him and assured him that she would be fine. She then stood up and proposed that they go to bed, but instead of standing up, Al tried to lie down next to the fire, so she stopped him. She asked him to join her inside the tent, but he refused, saying it was improper for a guy and a girl to be in such close quarters. In response, Rory said she didn't consider him a man and told him that if he remained outside, the orcs would come for his cherry. Terrified by the thought of the orcs, Al rushed into the tent to join Rory, who then suggested they chat until they fell asleep. However, the moment her head hit the pillow, she crossed over into Slumberland and spent the rest of the night using Al as a training dummy. The following day, after they arrived at Rizz, Rory hinted that she wanted to see Al again, so he asked her to be his armed escort for his trip back home. The girl happily agreed and drew a map of the town, showing the hotel she would be staying at so that he could come find her when he was ready to leave. Once she bid him farewell, she went about asking questions about the demon attacks, but no one had heard or seen anything. Rory found this strange, but was determined not to give up, as giving up would prove that what people said about her being a failure was true. Just then, she heard a woman scream, so she rushed to find out what had happened, and when she found her, the woman said some demons had abducted her sister. Rory asked which way they went, and the woman said they went towards the Forest of Illusion. As Rory rushed to the forest, promising to bring the girl back, she didn't notice she was being watched. Meanwhile, Al had just arrived at his parents' house, and before he could ring the bell, his mother came rushing out. She grabbed the poor boy and ran a lap around the town before crashing into the wall at their house. Unaware that he was fighting for his life, Lucia hugged Al tightly and kept gushing about how much she'd missed her baby boy. Just then, Al's father walked out and mistook Al for someone hitting on his wife, so he punched him. Annoyed, his wife went Super Saiyan and dragged him into the house to beat some sense into him for hurting their son. Later, during dinner, she served Al all his favorite foods, but gave Jills a burnt bird to eat. While Al ate his meal, he accidentally mentioned Rory, so his mother began interrogating him about her. His idiot father said it would be nice if Al bagged himself a hottie, and in response to this, Lucica showed him why wrestling wasn't meant for kids. Realizing his mistake, Al explained that Rory was his armed escort and assured his mother that he was still as single as the day he was born. The following day, after Al purchased his fertilizer, he was tricked into going into the Forest of Illusion by the man who had been watching Rory the day before. Inside the forest, Al encountered the same woman Rory had encountered and saved her from the monster that was about to devour her. However, she transformed into the same monster that had been trying to eat her. Before the monster could swallow Al, Rory arrived and slayed it without any hesitation. She then explained that the monster always regenerated after she slayed it, and as Al attempted to ask more questions, the man showed himself. Rory recognized him as the merchant who told her about the attacks, and he commended her for fighting off the monsters alone. However, he said she was a dense fool for not realizing that she'd been tricked and told her that she'd failed as a hero. The low-budget Willy Wonka then introduced himself as Loki, revealing that he was a demon. Rory angrily asked why he'd gotten Al involved when it was her he wanted to destroy, and Loki answered that it was because Al was the most important one among them. He said that he couldn't overlook the hillbilly who single-handedly took down Romeo and Ouroboros. Rory was shocked to hear this, but that didn't stop her from trying to cut Loki down, and this got her hurt. Al used his magic to heal her, and Rory apologized for being more useless than Sakura. After Al assured her that he wasn't disappointed in her, he tried to fight Loki, but the wannabe trickster evaded his attacks before punching Al into the earth. Fortunately, he didn't fall into the lava chasm like Big Mom did and punched his way back up. This time, he landed a hit on Loki, but the demon retaliated with a force that would have sent him to Hades if his plot armor wasn't plotting. Seeing this, Loki realized that Al wasn't some random nobody, and once he acknowledged this, he promised Al that he would end his life. Al then asked Loki why he wanted him dead, and Loki revealed that he was on a mission to eliminate everyone he deemed to be a threat to his plans. Additionally, he said he came after Rory because just as the Demon King had the evil god's power, the hero had the good god's power, but Rory's powers were yet to awaken. When he was done speaking, he unleashed his monsters on Rory, but Al swooped in and saved her. As soon as Rory regained her senses, she began attacking the monsters and asked Al to run, but he refused. He joined her to fight the monsters, but they kept coming back like those persistent cockroaches in your cupboard. Loki then hit them with some explosive spells, which left a crater in the ground. When they tried to stand, one of the monsters knocked Rory out of the way before joining the other one to attack Al. As they sucked on Al, Loki returned his attention to Rory, who seemed to have accepted her fate. She apologized to her parents for letting them down and failing to become a hero. But before Loki could finish her off, the leech monsters suddenly crumbled up and died. It turned out that they had been ingesting the fertilizer Al had strapped to his back, and since the fertilizer could also be used as a pesticide, it was harmful to them. Loki commended Al for outsmarting him, but still gloated over the fact that Al was too injured to attack. Al attempted to prove him wrong by charging at him, but Loki dodged his attack and told him to wait his turn like a good little boy. Al refused to listen and boldly declared that he would defeat Loki and save Rory. Hearing this declaration made Rory have a rethink of how she saw herself and how others saw her. She realized that she had been so focused on the negative things people said about her that she convinced herself that she would never become a hero. Armed with a newfound determination, she approached Loki and stabbed him. Loki told her that a simple stab wound wouldn't hurt him and moved away from the sword. But Rory assured him that the next time she hit him, she wouldn't miss. The next moment, she began powering up, and before Loki could come up with a contingency plan, she slashed him. Once he was gone, Rory rushed to check on Al, but he was too exhausted from the fight that he fainted in her arms. When Al woke up later and realized he was resting on Rory's lap, he tried to sit up quickly and accidentally hit his head against hers. After apologizing for the collision, he suggested they head back into town, and as they walked through the forest, they began hearing strange noises. Rory assumed it was a monster or a ghost, but after Al listened closely and realized it was his mother, he carried Rory and fled, fearing that his mother would hurt her if she saw them together. When they were far enough, he put Rory down, and the girl laughed as she teased him about being scared of ghosts, but Al said nothing because his mother was scarier than a ghost. When they arrived at Rory's hotel later, they discovered that it never existed in the first place and was part of Loki's illusions. Sometime later, Al arrived at his parents' house and secretly prayed that his mother was still out searching for him since he didn't want to deal with her. Unfortunately, his prayers weren't answered because the moment he opened the door, Lucica suddenly appeared behind him. Terrified, Al rushed into the house, ignoring his father's greeting in his desperate attempt to avoid his mother. Because of this, poor Jills was the one who faced her wrath, and she hung him outside to dry when she was done. When Al tried to leave in the morning, Lucica held on to his leg and begged him not to go with tears streaming down her face. Jills told her to let Al be, but she angrily told him to mind his business. Returning her attention to Al, she tried to convince him to stay, but Al told her that if she didn't stop, he would grow to hate her. This was enough to make her calm down, and she apologized for being too pushy and clingy. Before bidding him farewell, she asked Al if his decision to be a farmer was because he was bound by obligation. Hearing this, Al recalled a time in his childhood when he stood in front of a grave. However, the memory left as fast as it came, and he assured his mother that she had the wrong idea. Accepting his response, Lucica advised him to live his life with no regrets and wished him all the best. So Al thanked her and bid his parents farewell. He met Rory later after purchasing more fertilizer, and as they began the journey back to the capital, he told her that if she ever found herself in a pinch, she should reach out to him and he would come to save her, causing the love-struck girl to blush. Meanwhile, in the capital, Fal was standing on the balcony when her maid came to inform her that the king was requesting her presence. Days later, after Al and Rory returned to the capital, Al took Rory to register with the guild as an adventurer. Another day, Al caught a young boy stealing from his farm just as Helen and Rory arrived to help him out. Surprisingly, Al wasn't angry that the boy had stolen from him, he was angry that he'd picked the eggplants before they were ready. The girls weren't completely surprised by his outburst, but there was nothing they could do about it. The boy apologized for stealing, and when his stomach growled, Al harvested a cabbage and gave it to him. As soon as the boy tasted it, he declared it was the sweetest thing he'd eaten and thanked Al. After he left, Helen explained that the recent monster attacks had affected trade, causing food prices to soar. Just then, the alarm bells went off, signaling another monster attack, so Al and the girls rushed to the capital to lend a hand. When they arrived, they joined the guild members and knights battling the monsters. Unfortunately, it didn't matter how many monsters they slayed because a new swarm always showed up to replace them. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a group of knights flying the flag of a neighboring country arrived. Their leader then raised his sacred sword and commanded the monsters to leave or face the sharp end of his blade. Surprisingly, the monsters obeyed his command and retreated into the forest from which they came. The knights cheered as the monsters left, but Al and the people of Magus were stunned by what they had just witnessed. That night, while Al was home cleaning his farm tools, Fal knocked on his door and shocked him by saying she'd come to say goodbye. After letting her in, she explained that she was leaving Magus for good. But before Al could question her further, Fal's maid, Albie, knocked on the door and informed Fal that it was time for them to depart. Fal then got up and bid Al a final goodbye before walking to her carriage. Al followed her, demanding answers, but Fal gave him none and left him standing there looking confused as her carriage pulled away. Days later, the mother of the boy who attempted to steal from him visited him with her son, and she apologized for what her son had done. She also made the boy apologize again, but Al assured them that he bore no grudges against the kid. The mother then told Al that she worked as a tailor and told him that if he needed anything, she'd be happy to help. The boy tried hyping his mother's skills, but the woman wouldn't let him and asked Al to sell some vegetables to her. After making the sale, the woman and her soon left, but Al nearly had a heart attack when he noticed Reeks standing beside him. Ignoring Al's reaction, Reeks handed him a letter from his mother, and Al apologized for troubling him. While they talked, the topic shifted to how the monster attacks had ended because of the sacred sword of the Kingdom of Antisburg. When Al mentioned that it was nice of the Kingdom of Antisburg to come to their aid, Reeks murmured that things weren't as they seemed. Confused, Al asked what he meant, but the mailman refused to expatiate on the topic. He then showed Al the newspaper that had just been printed, and after reading the front page story, Al was shocked. Meanwhile, at the guild, Rory was conversing with Helen when her stomach growled, so Helen gave her some sandwiches. As Rory devoured them, Helen read the paper and showed the story on the front page to Rory. It so happened that Fal was getting married to the Prince of Antisburg, and the girls speculated that it was a marriage of convenience. Rory even pointed out that it was strange that the monsters obeyed the prince's command when it was common knowledge that monsters were brain-dead stupid and couldn't understand human language. Just then, Al arrived and showed the girls his mother's letter, but as they began reading it out loud, he nearly died from embarrassment because everything in the first half of the letter was Lucica declaring her undying love for her son. He immediately snatched the paper and tore it up before showing them the part he wanted them to read. In the letter, Lucica had talked about the recent monster attacks and said she'd gone to investigate the reason behind them. From her investigation, she learned that the legendary sacred sword had no powers because it was as fake as your ex's tan. Lucica swore that the information she gathered was legit because as the former commander of the Shadow Puppets. The girls were surprised to learn about Lucica's former position, but Al, being the clueless idiot that he was, didn't understand why. They had to explain to the pea-brained ninny that the Shadow Puppets were an intelligence unit that made Anbu Black Ops look like a joke, and it was mind-blowing that his mother was their former commander. As the girls continued reading the letter, they learned that the monsters were being summoned by a demon who was only doing it because his lover was taken hostage by the Prince of Antisburg. This last bit immediately helped them deduce that the prince had set everything up so that he could trick Foal into marrying him, so they said they were going to expose him. Rory pointed out that even if they wanted to embark on their mission, they had no way of gaining access to Antisburg since their immigration screening was very tight. Al said he had a plan, and the next moment, Rizz, who had been patiently waiting, revealed himself. Meanwhile, in the Antisburg kingdom, Prince Netalus was in a meeting with representatives from different kingdoms. They had all come to request his assistance, and Netalus milked the situation to his advantage. After the meeting, Gazelle, the demon Netalese was forcing to summon monsters, told the prince that he was tired of his game and wouldn't summon any more monsters. In response, Netalus slapped Gazelle and told him that he had no right to refuse his requests, reminding him that his lover's life was at stake. Suddenly, Fowl burst into the room, so Gazelle hid his face under his hood and remained quiet as she scolded Netalus for hitting him. Nejali said disciplining the common folk from time to time was required to make them fall in line. Back at the Magus Kingdom, while Al collected the clothes he requested from the tailor, Rizz informed the girls that his friend in the kingdom of Antisburg had made arrangements to secure their entry into the kingdom. Once Al arrived, Rizz told them to go ahead in the carriage he'd provided and said all they had to do was tell the guards that they were delivering goods for the wedding. Curious, they asked what Rizz would be doing, and he told them he would procure the monsters they needed to prove that Netalus was a fraud. This prompted them to ask how he'd do that, so Rizz revealed that he was one of the many demons who had integrated themselves into human society. The following day, the carriage carrying Al and the girls arrived in Antisburg, and after a while, the trio came out of it. Al felt optimistic, but the girls didn't because they believed that the disguises Al got for them would make them stand out. Al argued that it wouldn't, since farmers were the least suspicious beings, and then went on to give a breakdown of their mission. They were to save Gazelle's lover from Netalus's men and take her to the church to reunite with him. Once they were reunited, they would have Gazelle reveal that the sacred sword was fake, and all would be fine. However, as they left the alley they were in, they ran into a knight who asked who they were, causing the girls to freak out. Al answered that they were farmers on their way to deliver fresh vegetables to the palace, and immediately, the knight flagged them as suspicious individuals. They found themselves being chased by a group of knights, and the girls blamed Al for their misfortune. Despite this, they decided to stick to their plan, and since they couldn't shake off the guards, they threw Al into the castle through the wall. Coincidentally, the room he ended up in was the room where Gazelle's lover was being kept, and he told her he'd come to take her to Gazelle. Just then, the knights guarding the room arrived, so Al taught them the true power of vegetables. Once he was done schooling them, he asked the girl to come with him, but the ball chain on her leg prevented her from moving. Having no choice, Al picked her up like a sack and ran like his life depended on it out of the castle. He bumped into Helen and Rory on the way, and they all continued running towards the church. At some point, Helen and Rory hung back and asked Al to go ahead without them, promising to keep the knights busy. Meanwhile, Rizz was standing outside the city and decided it was time he played his part in the mission. At the church, the ceremony began after the king walked Fowl to the altar to meet Netalus. Despite having second thoughts, Fowl still said I do when the priest asked the million-dollar question. He then asked them to seal their marriage with a kiss, and as Netalus drew closer to Fowl, the princess wished he would take his putrid-smelling mouth away from her. The next moment, the church door suddenly flew off its things and smacked Netalese to the floor. Everyone was shocked by this unexpected turn of events, but when Al walked into the church, Fowl was filled with relief. Netalese came to stand between them and declared that Al was the villain trying to kidnap the princess. When he ordered that Al be detained, Al calmly stated that the sacred sword was fake, causing the guests to begin murmuring amongst themselves. Netellus was scared that he'd been caught, but he decided he had to fake it till he made it, so he accused Al of trying to ruin the ceremony. Fal's father assured Al that the sword was real because he had seen it at work, and Netellus decided to ride in the man's coat. He called Al a liar and, with a smug smile, asked if he could bring proof of his claims. Just as Al answered that he could, a knight rushed in to inform the prince that the city was being invaded by monsters. At that time, Rizz was flying above the city as he blew on a special flute, which seemed to bring swarms of monsters to the city. Afraid, the guests began demanding that Netellus use the sacred sword to command the monsters to leave. Hoping to save face, Netellus called out to Gazelle, asking him to bring the sword, but was shocked to see the demon hugging his lover. Rizz showed up the next moment with the sword. However, Netellus hesitated to take it. The people's clamoring increased when the monsters made it into the church, so Al grabbed the sword and threw it at the first monster to walk in. To everyone's surprise, the monster broke the sword in half, and that was when they accepted that Al had been telling the truth. The king demanded to know how Netellus had dispersed the monsters with a fake sword, and Gazelle answered that it had all been staged. He backed up his words by blowing on his flute, and everyone watched as the monsters retreated. After this, Gazelle explained that during those attacks, he would blow on his flute when Netellus gave the signal by raising the sword. The king asked Netellus to defend himself against the accusations, but the prince started laughing like a madman. He then revealed that he'd sent a swarm of monsters to Magus the previous day. Gazelle asked how he'd done it without his help, and Netellus explained that he scattered the carcasses of monsters around the city to lure the monsters there. When he began gloating over the fact that the capital city would fall, Rory and Helen appeared at the door and declared that the city would be fine. They explained that after the monster attacks stopped, the people came to them and asked them to train them in combat so they would be prepared in case of another attack. The king was filled with pride after hearing this, and Al told Fal that she didn't have to sacrifice herself for the sake of the kingdom. The Knights of Antisburg arrived shortly after this, and to Nettellus's surprise, they threw down their weapons and detained him. Helen and Rory explained that while they were running from them, they had the chance to reveal his evil deeds to them, and they agreed he needed to be stopped. Refusing to accept defeat, Netellus grabbed a small knife and charged at the king, but Al foiled his plans with a radish. He then sucker punched Netellus in the face, and after he was taken away, Fal hugged Al, declaring her love for him. While Rory voiced her disapproval of their relationship, Helen remained calm, and the king told them that they had his blessings. After this, he walked out of the church, but Rizz approached him before he could leave. He handed him a letter they had intercepted from Netellus and revealed that Netellus wasn't the mastermind behind the whole incident. Days later, Fal brought a chest full of jewels to the guild to thank them for defending the city. As the adventurers helped themselves to the treasure, Fal left, and when she returned as Philia later, she got into a heated stare-off with Rory because of Al. Another day, while Al was harvesting his crops, Fal and Rory showed up demanding to know who he liked, but he ignored them. However, when Rory asked whether there was another woman besides them whom he had feelings for, Al shocked them by answering that there was. They asked who it was, but he ignored the question and rushed away with the crops he'd harvested. Later that night, when Al got home, he dropped some vegetables in front of a picture frame and told the girl in the picture that he'd picked a lot of vegetables again that day. Years ago, when Al was still a kid, he helped his father harvest some potatoes, and when the man saw that he'd harvested so much, he praised him. However, Lucica suddenly showed up and beat her husband up, accusing him of exploiting their child. Later that day, Al took some of the potatoes he had harvested to the old couple next door. While he was speaking with them, he heard a commotion and turned to see two men and a girl around his age. Confused, he asked the old couple what was going on, and they explained that the little girl was a thief. They also said that since she didn't have a home or any family, she would be sold to a slave trader. At that moment, the girl broke away from her captors, and as she ran, she grabbed the basket of potatoes Al brought for the couple. He found her later at the side of the mountain eating the potato, and when the girl saw him, she ran away. Al called out to her to stop, explaining that he'd only come to give her a plate of food. The girl was shocked and didn't respond, so he dropped the bowl on the ground and told her that she could eat it if she wanted. The next day, he came with another bowl of food, but after calling out to the girl and getting no response, he placed the bowl in the ground and left. On the third day, the girl came out of hiding and allowed Al to sit with her while she ate the sandwiches he brought. Al proudly told her that he grew the tomatoes that were used to make the sandwich, and the girl was impressed. He also told her that his father always said that farmers who grew vegetables always found happiness in knowing that there were people who would eat their produce with a smile. He then asked what her name was, and she told him it was Ilvia, so he introduced himself to her. Just then, his stomach growled loudly, and Ilvia offered her sandwich to him. But before he could take it, those farmers suddenly grabbed her. Al asked why they were still after her when she hadn't stolen anything from them again, and they told him that they needed her to pay for the losses they suffered because of her. Hoping to convince them to let Ilvia go, Al got on his knees and pleaded with them to forgive her. He even promised to grow lots of vegetables to pay back what she owed them, but they refused. He was still in the process of begging them when Jules showed up carrying a bale of rice. He asked what the problem was, so the men explained it as best as they could, and after listening to them, he offered them the rice in exchange for leaving Ilvia alone. After they left with their new possession, Al asked Jules if he was sure about his decision. Jules said that he was, but admitted that he was scared that Lucica would skin him alive. Ilvia interrupted their talk to return the basket of potatoes she had stolen, and Jules said they would need an extra pair of hands to cook them. It took Al a few seconds to catch his old man's drift, and after he did, he asked Ilvia if she would like to come to their house and help him cook the potatoes every day. Realizing what his question meant, Ilvia happily agreed, and the three of them went home. 2 years later, Ilvia had adjusted to living with the Waynes, and she was more or less Al's shadow. One afternoon, she asked Al to take a break from harvesting crops, but Al didn't want to. Their father told her not to bother, and Ilvia voiced her displeasure. In response to her outburst, Al suggested she go play with the other kids in the village instead of following him around like a lost puppy, and Ilvia said she didn't want to. The next moment, Testa, who was being chased by bees, came running towards them, screaming for help. Lucica suddenly came out of nowhere and karate chopped the bees down for him. Lucica then said she and Jules were heading into town to look at houses, and Al protested, insisting that their house was fine. Lucica explained that as a family of 4, they needed more space, and when Al tried to protest, his father cut him off. He told them that they should look after the fields and the house while they were away. After their parents left, Al asked Testa why the bees had chased him, and the boy pulled out a map. Pointing at the spot marked X, he explained that he'd gone hunting for treasure in the forest behind the village when the bees suddenly attacked him. He managed to convince Al to be the boots to his Dora, and when Ilvia asked if she could tag along, they refused. As they walked through the forest, Al told Testa that he didn't understand why Ilvia always insisted on going everywhere with him instead of playing with the other kids in the village. Testa said it was because the other kids and the villagers didn't like Ilvia, so they didn't treat her right whenever she tried to associate with them. Al was surprised to hear this, and even more surprised when Testa revealed that Ilvia's discrimination was the reason their parents were looking for a new house. Feeling bad, Al wanted to return home, but Testa begged him to stick with him longer, and he relented. A little while later, they arrived at the marked spot on the map, and as they looked around, the ground suddenly opened, and they fell into an underground cave. Inside the cave was an old building which looked like it had been abandoned for years. Testa spotted a stone tablet at the corner with some strange writings on it, and when Al touched it, it lit up. The next moment, he saw himself in the presence of what resembled a dragon, and when it tried to bite him, everything went dark. When Al regained consciousness, he was in a tent with a worried Ilvia, and after he sat up, Testa arrived. Confused, Al asked Testa what was happening, so Testa took him outside to show him the place. He explained that a volcano had erupted, and everything became chaotic. Just then, someone cried out that the only bridge linking them to the capital had been destroyed, so they had to wait for aid to come. Testa soon left because he was informed that his parents had been found, so Ilvia helped Al back to their tent. On the way, they heard the village chief say that the food they had wasn't enough, so Al insisted on returning to their field. Upon getting there, he saw that everything had been destroyed, and he became angry. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his chest and fell, making Ilvia worried, but he assured her that he was fine. That night, while everyone slept, Ilvia snuck into the village chief's tent to steal some food. but changed her mind after remembering the way Al begged for her freedom years ago. The following day, Ilvia added her portion of food to Al's own and made him believe that aid had come from the capital. As the days passed, Ilvia continued giving all her portion of food until one day she passed out. Tester rushed to inform Al about this, but sadly, Ilvia had already passed away from malnutrition. Hearing this, Al asked how that was possible when aid had come from the capital, and Testa told him that such a thing had never happened. That was when he realized that Ilvia had sacrificed herself for him, and he cried out in agony as he held her lifeless body. Ilvia was buried later, and as Al stood before her grave, he continued blaming himself for her untimely death. Back in the present, Al told himself that if Ilvia was still alive, he'd have given her all the vegetables she could eat. However, he decided to stop thinking about the past and go about his daily activities. Weeks later, after Al finished his monster subjugation quest, he decided to head home and came across an unconscious girl. Worried that she was seriously hurt, Al decided to take her back home with him. When he woke up the next day, the girl was standing before him, and she asked why she was at his house. Al explained that he'd found her passed out on the road, and she asked if he was one of those creeps who preyed on defenseless girls. Al assured her that he wasn't interested in her tater-tots plots and said that even if he was, he would make a move while she was conscious. He asked where she'd been headed before she passed out, and she answered that she was on her way to the guild to make a request. When she tried to leave, Al offered to take her there after breakfast since he also had business there. He then introduced himself to her before asking what her name was, to which she responded that it was Linnea. Rory dropped by a little while later, but when she saw Linnea standing inside the house, she immediately concluded that she and Al had worked out all night. Linnea tried asking Rory who she was, but the girl ran out of the house screaming about how filthy Al was. Later, at the guild, Al explained the situation to Helen, and she promised to clear things up with Rory. He then told her that Linnea was there to make a request, so Helen took them to a private room. There, she inquired about Linnea's request, and Linnea said she wanted them to investigate the strange things that had been happening in her hometown. Sadly, she couldn't explain what was causing the problem or even prove that there was a problem, so Helen told her that it would be hard to get someone to agree to take on the request. Being the good Samaritan that he was, Al volunteered himself as tribute, and Helen thanked him. She asked Linnea what the name of her town was, and when Linnea said it was Gull Town, Al lost it. It turned out that Gull Town was famous for the asparagus they grew, and he had been wishing to visit there. Before heading to Gull Town, Al got Linnea a change of clothes, and once again, the girl assumed he was trying to get in her pants. She called him a lecherous wolf trying to take advantage of her, but Al promised that he had no ulterior motives in mind. Linnea was still hesitant to trust him. However, she said she would give him the benefit of the doubt. The pair hitched a ride to Gull Town on the back of a carriage, and as they journeyed, they noticed a female orc running after the carriage, causing Al to panic and wonder when the orcs would stop gunning for his peaches. Just then, more orcs joined the first orc, and that panic turned to full-on fear. Al was so afraid that he passed out, and when he woke up later, he was in Linnea's lap. Quickly, he moved away and, as he apologized for letting her place his head on her lap, he noticed that she'd given him a similar pendant to hers. Linnea explained that the pendant had a mentally calming effect and could ward off evil, so he should keep it on. Soon they arrived at Gull, but were stopped at the gate by the guards who asked Al who he was. Linnea told them he was with her, so they apologized and let him through. However, Al couldn't help but wonder why they were using mops instead of spears. As they walked around town, Al spotted a vendor selling asparagus skewers, so he rushed over to him to buy one. While waiting for his order, he questioned the man about the strange occurrences, and the man told him that nothing was amiss in the town. He then handed Al his order, but it was burnt to a crisp, and for some reason, Al assumed that was how it was supposed to be. Linnea told him that he was wrong, and that was when he noticed that the vendor was out of it. Their attention was soon drawn to a man who accidentally knocked over his vegetable cart. After he got back up, he continued walking like nothing had happened, so Al called out to him to pick up the rest of his produce. When the man turned around, he looked the same way the food vendor had looked, and this worried Al. Before he could make sense of what was happening, he was mistaken for luggage and carried away by two people. Linnea found him by the fountain in the town square later and invited him to come to her place to relax a bit. At her family's store, Linnea showed Al more replicas of the pendant she'd gifted him and explained that it was the reason they were unaffected by whatever was going around town. Al then asked if he could take the pendants, and Linnea told him that he could have them. Al thanked her and asked where her parents were, and Linnea said she didn't know. She explained that she hadn't heard from them since everyone in town started moving mad, so Al promised to investigate what happened to them. As they walked around town later, Al observed that stranger things kept happening. The only person who seemed normal aside from him and Linnea was the town's lord, Limuru Horn. As soon as Al heard the man's name, he turned into a fanboy, gushing over meeting his idol. He asked Limuru if he could question him about what was happening in town, and the man invited him to dinner at his place. The next moment, Al was taken away again by the same idiots who had mistaken him for luggage earlier. Linnea found him by the statue again, and while they were conversing, she asked if he hadn't found Limuru's behavior strange. Al agreed with Linnea's observation, but said he would still have to investigate the matter properly. That evening, they went to Limuru's home for dinner, and soon after they sat at the dinner table, Limuru's guards pulled their swords in Al. Since he'd expected this, Al didn't panic and took out the guards before attempting to attack Limuru, but Linnea stood in his way. Limuru, or rather Vrida, the demon controlling him, then revealed that everything was his master plan to control humanity. After taking possession of Limuru, he infused crystals with his magic and placed them inside the statue in the middle of the fountain in the town square. This allowed him to gain control of everyone in town, and as he began preparing to do the same to the capital, he learned what Al had done to Romeo and Ouroboros. This pushed him to change his plans because he was sure that if he gained control of Al, he would become unstoppable. When he concluded his explanation, he attempted to possess Al, but Al smashed a small stone he'd been holding, and the next moment, the statue blew up. Vrida asked how he'd done it, and Al revealed that breaking the stone had given Helen and Rory the signal they needed to blow up the statue. Vrida didn't believe Al because Linnea had been watching him all day, but Al reminded him of the 2 times he'd been out of her sight. It turned out that the girls had followed them because they were worried, and they had kidnapped Al the first time to tell him their suspicions. The second kidnapping was done so he could give them the crystals and form a plan to foil the demon's plans. Annoyed, Vrida compelled Limuru to take his life, but Al stopped him by tossing some asparagus in his mouth. Once the man tasted it, he came back to his senses, and Al punched the demon away. Later, when it was time to leave, Linnea told Al to keep the pendant as a gift, and then kissed his cheek to show her appreciation. Rory and Helen witnessed this, so the moment he set off, they rushed after him, demanding answers. Days later, while the girls were helping Al on the farm, they suddenly heard him scream, so they rushed to find out what had happened and were surprised to discover that weeds were the cause of the problem. Al lamented the fact that he hadn't noticed the weed growing earlier, and the girls didn't know how to react to his outburst without laughing. Later that day, they joined him at the market to sell his produce, and while there, the king dropped by wearing a disguise. Fal hid as soon as she saw him because she didn't want her cover to be blown. The king bought some vegetables, and before leaving, he asked Al when he would tie the knot with his daughter. Al tried to think of the most polite way to tell the man never, but the king was a crafty fellow. He promised Al that he'd give him additional land and new farm tools if he agreed to marry Fal. This offer sounded tempting to Al, and he would have agreed if Rory hadn't stopped him. Annoyed that Rory was ruining her chances, Fal tried to hit her with a potato, but she dodged it, and Al got hit instead. While he was unconscious, a woman appeared to him, but Al woke up before she could tell him anything useful. Al wondered what had happened, but kept it to himself since he didn't want to sound like a crazy cuckoo. Shortly after the king left, they sold off the remaining goods, and Al thanked the girls for helping him. He said he would use the money from the sales to purchase some herbicides for the weeds, and he seemed very pleased with the idea of eliminating them. Watching him descend into his villain arc spooked the girls out, so they came up with excuses to leave right away. As Al walked through the city, he ran into Rizz, who asked if someone had pissed in his cereal. Al explained his situation with the weeds and went on a tangent about how he would get rid of them with the herbicide he bought. Seeing Al act like that was new to Rizz. However, he didn't run off like the girls did. Just then, they noticed a girl struggling against some men, so Al approached them and told them to leave her alone. One of the guys told him to mind his business and even tried to stab him, but Al knocked him out easily before doing the same to his friend, the fugly fatso, who was left standing to run away like a coward when Al turned his attention to him. His mad dash caused the hood the girl was wearing to come off, exposing her horns to Al and Rizz. When the girl realized what had happened, she put her hood back on in fear, but Rizz smiled and asked if her name was Yuria. She asked how he knew who she was, and he revealed that he was also a demon before explaining to Al that Yuri was the current demon king's daughter. Curious, Al asked why she was in a human town, but Yuria hesitated to answer because he was a human. Rizz had to assure her that Al was one of the good humans before she opened up. It turned out that her personal servant, Volp, was the one who sent her there because, according to him, she was in danger. Yuria told them she didn't know what kind of danger he was referring to, but said she had a feeling that something wasn't right in the demon kingdom. Hearing this, Al offered to take her there and asked Rizz to take on the task of eliminating the weeds in his farm. Rizz asked if he'd needed help booking a ship ride to the demon kingdom, and Al told him no. He said a ship ride was too expensive for a broke person like him, so he was going to rely on his legs. He then carried a screaming Yuria in his arms as he ran across the ocean like he was on a racetrack. When they arrived, Yuria thanked him, saying that thanks to him, she could save her people. But before they could leave the beach, Volp showed up. He tried attacking Yuria, but Al saved her and engaged him in a battle for a few minutes before he deduced that the demon was being controlled. He managed to gain the upper hand and knocked Volp out, but the demon didn't stay down for long. When he got back up, he attempted to annihilate Al and Yuria, but Lucica suddenly showed up and knocked him unconscious. Al asked his mother how she knew where to find him and said that Rizz had told her everything. She then introduced herself to Yuria, but she was afraid and hid behind Al. Al told her there was nothing to be afraid of and questioned her about Volp because the demon's powers were off the charts. Yuria revealed that Volp was the most powerful magic user among demons, but he spent most of his time doting on her. From her explanation, Al concluded that Volp deserved to be a nominee for the Creep of the Year awards, and Lucica agreed. However, she said they had to keep moving. Upon arriving at the castle, they found all the guards unconscious, so Yuria rushed to the throne room to look for her father. They found him lying on the floor, but Al confirmed that he was still breathing. Looking around, he noticed one of the guards moving, so he went over to him to ask questions. The demon was about to answer him when he saw that Yuria was also in the room. He expressed his happiness at seeing her alive, but told her to run away when he noticed Lucica pulling out a sword. Al immediately swung into action, saving Yuria in the process, and Lucica told him she was disappointed in him for going against her. Al calmly told her to drop the act and said he knew she wasn't his mother as soon as he saw her because she didn't rush to hug him like she normally would. The fake Lucica commended him for seeing through her disguise and then shocked him by revealing that she was Ilvia. He asked how she could be alive, and she said it was all thanks to the great evil god. She then raised her hand and gathered a ball of magical energy, which she directed at Yuria, but Al reacted just in time to save her. The magic energy cut through the throne and walls before destroying the mountains that were in the way. Ignoring Al and Yuria's shock, Ilvia revealed that Al had the evil god's powers sealed away inside him. Seeing the look of disbelief on his face, she explained that on the day he leveled up all his farming skills, he received the great evil god's skill, which increased his attack power. Al asked what business the great evil god had with him, and when he mentioned that he had never seen the guy before, Ilvia told him that he had. She then said that if Al agreed to join hands with her and the great evil god, she would tell him everything in great detail. As she spoke, she held Al's face in her hands and tried to hypnotize him into doing her bidding, but Yuria interrupted her. She called out to Al to snap out of it, and Ilvia became pissed when she heard Yuria address Al as Big Brother. Petty as she was, she grabbed Yuria by the throat and told her to stop butting in and trying to steal her brother away from her. Al pleaded with her to stop and tried to intervene, but Ilvia hit him with a spell and calmly told him to accept her offer or watch Yuria die. Yuria pleaded with Al not to give in to Ilvia's demands, and Ilvia got pissed with her for meddling again, so she decided to finish her off. As she raised her hand to do so, the pendant around Al's neck began to glow, and the next moment, time froze. It took Al a few seconds to understand what was happening, and when he did, the woman who had appeared to him at the market appeared again. She introduced herself as the good god and explained that the evil god had been preventing her from speaking to him since. She also said they didn't have much time, so she would remove the evil god's power that was sealed inside him and replace it with her power. As soon as she said this, the evil god tried to intervene, but she repelled him and did what she said she'd do. Once her task was completed, she told Al that she'd rewind time a bit to give him a chance to save Yuria, and he thanked her. When she vanished, time began moving again, but she kept her word and pushed it back a little to increase his chances of saving Yuria. Using the good god's power, Al attempted to stop Ilvia, but to his surprise, what manifested were weeds. Ilvia mocked him for using cheap parlor tricks against her, but the next second, the weeds wrapped around her, forcing her to let go of Yuria. However, it couldn't hold her for long, and she broke free before attempting to attack Yuria again. Al immediately used the weeds as a barrier, and surprisingly, it was stronger than your last relationship. The weeds then wrapped around her again, and as she struggled against them, Volp arrived. He immediately attacked her with his magic, and once he was sure she'd been subdued, he went to check on Yuria. Unfortunately, Ilvia was unharmed, and she sent Volp flying into a wall for daring to attack her in the first place. Al tried to intervene, but she walked past him and was about to end Volp's life when Al cried out for her to stop. Realizing that Al wouldn't let her have her way, Ilvia decided to leave, but she promised Al that she would return for him when the time was right. As soon as she vanished, Volp grabbed Al by the collar and demanded to know what his relationship was to Ilvia. Yuria pleaded with him not to hurt Al since he was the one who saved her life, but Volp didn't want to listen. Just then, the Demon Lord spoke up and ordered Volp to release the man who saved their lives, so Volp backed off. The Demon King then apologized on Volp's behalf before asking who Ilvia was to him. Al admitted that she was his sister and explained everything he knew to him. The Demon King said he didn't know much about the evil god since it was the former Demon King who had dealings with him. However, he promised to look into it. When Al turned to leave, Yuria asked if she would see him again, and he promised that he would, so she hugged him. Volp lost it when he saw this, and he quickly pulled Yuria away before accusing Al of being indecent towards her. Al argued that he wasn't, and said that if there was anyone who was sus, it was him, but Volp denied it. Later, as Al walked home, he replayed the encounter with Ilvia and wondered if the dragon creature he'd seen in the cave all those years ago was the evil god. Hoping to get answers, he went to visit Testa to ask if he could remember anything from that day. Testa said that he hadn't seen the creature and didn't even know what Al meant when asked about the great evil god. The boys then eat some tomatoes, and before Al left, he invited Testa to spend time with him in the city, but Testa turned down the invitation. As Al walked away, Testa told himself that he was happy Al invited him, but he couldn't leave the village. Later, Al encountered a female orc, but instead of running, he turned and punched it in the face. Surprisingly, the punch did not affect the orc when it began chasing him. Jake's group arrived to help him. They asked why Al had been unable to defeat the orc, and Al admitted that he didn't know why. When they arrived at the guild, Al told Helen and Rory about what had happened, and they found it strange. Helen requested to see Al's stats, and when he showed them to her, she noticed that his power had reduced. This made Al realize that when the good god removed the evil god's power from his body, it returned him to a normal person. Seeing the look on his face, the girls asked if he knew why his stats dropped, and Al told them he didn't because he didn't want to burden them with the truth. Just then, Rizz arrived with a letter from Lucica, and as Al read the first part, the girls became scared because it seemed like Lucica was threatening them. In the other part of the letter, Lucica wrote that she heard something had happened to him and said that if he needed any advice, she would be happy to listen to him. She encouraged him to come home, and when she began professing her love for him again, Al decided he had read enough. Rizz asked if he'd write a reply, and Al told him no, so the mailman turned to leave. He bumped into Fal on the way out, and after they exchanged pleasantries, the princess approached Al. She invited him to hang out with her, but this triggered Rory and Helen, and when a drunk Luke tried to butt in, the three girls scared him off with their glares. Looking around him, Al wondered why everything happened the way it happened. However, he realized that things weren't so bad because he had the girls and those who cared about him. He resolved not to worry about what might come when Ilvia showed up again and decided to throw himself into his work because it was still his dream to become the greatest farmer ever. What do you think about Ilvia's return? Would she succeed in her plans, or would she join hands with Al to fight the evil god? If you've gotten this far and liked the video, comment the name of your favorite girl. Also, check out the next video. See you guys in the next video. Just then, a messenger informed Fowl that she was needed at the palace, and on getting there, the knights revealed that a swarm of monsters were approaching the city. This was shocking as the demons and humans already signed a peace pact, and as the king wondered what was going on, Cecil, the head administrator, revealed that he had already linked all the suspicious activities that happened that day to Romeo Vanded, one of the Demon King's commanders who wanted revenge on humans. He then suggested that the king and the princess escape before the swarm arrived, and after a combined effort begging the scrawny old man to save himself and his sheltered daughter, they finally agreed to flee from the city.